Afternoon, once again.
This meeting is being recorded.
Right, my name is Jabulani Shaba, and I will be the moderator for today's seminar. So today we have a special Africa Day. We are dedicating the theme of this seminar series. It will be about doing research in and on Africa, experiences, victories, and challenges. So today we are joined by three panelists who will be part of our roundtable discussions. So without wasting much time, let me just introduce them briefly, and then they will then introduce themselves more in greater detail. So we have Lotti Nkomo from the University of the Free State. We also have Ruva Masocha from Iowa University. Then we have Jacky Kosgei. I'm not so sure if I pronounced that in a proper way, but my sincere apologies. So this meeting is recorded, and maybe just a few housekeeping rules. If you have a question, you are invited to raise your hand, and as the discussion continues, we'll be also having this discussion and exchanges. So at this point in time, I would like to invite our three panelists, maybe just to tell us briefly where they come from, their research backgrounds, probably also how they started and where they are currently affiliated, and at what stage are they at in terms of their academic life. So we can start with, we shall start by Lotti Nkomo.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Jabulani, for having us on this presentation. I'm Lotti Nkomo. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the International Studies Group at the University of the Free State in South Africa. I did my MA here at the International Studies Group and my PhD. I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow, and my research interests are in traditional leaders, their relationship with the state, and also I'm trying to explore Zimbabwe's South Africa diplomatic relations in the 2000s.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to Ruva Masocha.
Thank you, Jabulani. Hello, everyone. I have my video off because my broadband is very bad right now. I started my academic life at University of Zimbabwe. I did my honors there and master's there in African economic history. And right now I am a PhD candidate at the University of Iowa, and I work with Professor Kipling. Currently I'm working on my field research, and my working title for my prospective dissertation is Social Use of Migration, Everyday Life and Regional Connectivity in Southern Africa. I'm focusing on Malawian and Mozambican farm and mine workers who live in Masocha. So directly, I'm more interested in the aspects of continuities that continue to shape these people as a community, like even though they are people who have backgrounds in different parts of Southern Africa, they are living together amongst the Shona, and I'm looking at the aspects about them that help them build this community and also that connect them back to their backgrounds. So things like Ubuntu, ethnicity, spiritual being, their spiritual ties with their homelands, and also even their relationship with the geographical space they are staying at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruva, for that introduction. I would now invite Jacky to speak. Jacky, I think you're still muted.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to unmute.
Thank you.
So, hello everyone, and thank you very much. I want to say thank you for this opportunity. Brian, thank you for organizing this and for inviting us. I'm also happy to meet the other panelists, Lotti and with everyone in the audience. So at Stellenbosch University, can you hear me?
Jacky, I think you are breaking. Can you maybe start again? Maybe we lost you a bit.
Okay, if you do lose me again, please let me know, and perhaps I can change my connection, but I will stop my video now. Maybe it will help. So I'm trained in literature. I did my PhD at Stellenbosch University. They call it English Studies over there. And currently I am a postdoc at WITS at WITS in Johannesburg. And before that, I was in Kenya for my BA and MA in literature at the University of Nairobi. And so I'm trained in literature. Although my interest with this group today perhaps will be that my research is quite interdisciplinary. It is largely based in Indian Ocean studies, but I also work with oral history from mostly from literary perspectives, yes, but I do research in oral history. And the larger texts that I work with are oral and written texts, to be specific, from the Kenyan coast that are preserved and disseminated in African languages, mostly Kiswahili and other local languages in Kenya. And so, yes, I look forward to engaging with you all today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Lotti, Jacky, and Ruva for those introductions. And maybe just perhaps out of interest, would you maybe consider just sharing just a bit about your research areas? What sort of motivated you to engage in the current work that you're doing, and is it something that you find interesting? Thank you.
Jablan?
Yes, Lotti, you can go ahead.
Is that for me? Oh.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, currently I'm looking at two things at the same time. I'm looking at chiefs and government, the relationship between chiefs and government after the 2000s. And I'm also looking at Zimbabwe-South Africa relations since Zimbabwe's independence in 1980. So the chiefs area of study was initiated during my master's program, but it was influenced by the fact that there was a lot of things that were being discussed around Zimbabwe's crisis period. There were being issues of politics, patronage, political violence. It was during the land reform program, but I noticed that chiefs were largely being considered in the context of land claims, land contestations, and the fast-track land reform program, but not in the manner that I have taken it, that is chiefs, government, patronage, politics, and violence. So it's an aspect that has been missing in literature that is focused on the crisis and chiefs. So rather than ride on the bandwagon of researchers who are looking at chiefs and land contestations, land claims, and those sort of issues, I decided to focus on an aspect that did not enjoyed scholarly attention. Then also, the other issue that I'm concurrently engaged with is the Zimbabwe-South Africa diplomatic political relations. The history of the relations is largely also focused on the colonial, Zimbabwe's colonial period, the colonial government and its relations with the apartheid, largely the apartheid government, or even since the 1890s. But a few have looked at how the diplomatic and political relations unfolded between 1980 to the Zimbabwe's crisis era. We have had these patches of work, but we have not had a kind of work that gives the subject a long view or a long jury, or has taken a long jury approach to engaging the relations between Zimbabwe and South Africa. So those are the two issues that I'm currently grappling with.
Thank you very much, Lotti. I'll move to Jacky.
Oh, thank you very much. As I mentioned earlier, I'm trained in literature. And what I think, what I like to talk about, what I find it easy to talk about in my work is perhaps my methodology that I apply in my research. I mentioned briefly that I research in oral texts that are recorded, that are, preserved and disseminated in African languages. And my focus is in Indian Ocean studies. So I work with Kenyan coastal communities to explore their literature, their culture, their history and heritage in relation to the Indian Ocean, and having in mind transoceanic histories and connections across the Indian Ocean. So I think what interests me, or what drove me to do this kind of research, is obviously the fact that most African knowledge is still carried and preserved in oral forms. Most of it has not been recorded, and therefore it's not widely available, but also it's not widely known. And we need to do more research into it so that we can disseminate this knowledge and archive it in some way, even as researchers. And so my interest is in making it public, archiving it in the way that I can, but also collaborating with local archivists. And I think that is what gives me joy in the work that I do. Yes, thank you.
I'll just jump in on that question. And I'd say for me, two things that really sparked my interest are that growing up, I lived amongst these migrant communities, and I was like a young child who is also a Shona, living among this migrant community in like compounds. We were living on a mining compound in Masocha, the same area where I'm actually doing my research right now. And the other thing is, as I explained, my background in economic history, and we studied a lot of labor history. And part of what we studied were these migrant communities, and we looked at this from a very labor perspective, where we're studying their working conditions, their contestations with capital, things like that. So as I started my PhD here and started to really open up to this idea of social history and realizing the importance of things like kinships, connections, relationships between people, and how they shape their everyday livelihoods. I just thought there is more to this story about these migrants that I can explore from that angle, and that is my goal.
All right, I must say these are quite interesting discussions, and especially taking us through your journeys, the things that you have came across, and especially what stimulated you to embark on these research areas. But perhaps I think it would be equally interesting to understand maybe how best all your researches can help us in understanding maybe African history, you know. So probably how does your researches contribute, you know, to the understanding of African history? And I would like to start with Jacky on that question.
Thank you. Although I didn't expect that I would be the first to go here, because we have historians in the house and I'm a bit wary, Brian. Yeah, so I'm not trained in history, and the way I handle the oral history I record is that I don't, perhaps let me not focus on what I don't do, but what I do and what I have learned in the process. So by recording oral histories that have previously not been recorded, not been told to the public. And of course, this I get by engaging with older people in the society, mostly old men in their 70s, 80s, and even 90s. So these are very old people who have this knowledge that was passed to them from their forefathers. And of course, we acknowledge the fact that history is patrilineal in nature. Yeah, I mean, yeah. And so in recording material and trying to make it known to the public through my writing and publishing, I have learned that African history is very rich, and there are multiple perspectives that have not been captured and are in danger of not being captured, because our research tends to move away from oral material as we understand it. And so I have been blessed to be in contact with multiple perspectives of history preserved in different languages, because of course language again has a role to play in narrating history, because it is the vehicle through which history is told and preserved. And so my takeaway is the multiplicity that we often tend to miss out on, because we keep focusing on narrow perspectives that are made available in written history, which, as we know it, has many contestations that if we start to talk about now, we cannot even end that discussion. And so I'm just drawing on those few oral histories that to call attention to the need to do more research into oral sources of knowledge, history being one of them, but also cultural, literary, and texts having to play. Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I will move on to Ruva before Lotti closes this round of questions.
Thank you, Jabulani. So my work, like I said earlier, mostly focuses on the continuities. And I should mention that for the longest time, scholars, when we're studying history, we are looking at the changes over time, the ruptures, what causes, maybe we can say, destabilization of a community. We look at displacements, the exploitation, in terms of labor, it's mostly like how the policy is affecting people, is it destabilizing the community, and all these things. So my interest is in introducing to the knowledge of African history, our understanding of what is like actually remaining intact in the amidst this destabilization, this changing of the shape of the community in general, because of migration, because of modernization, and a whole lot of things. So I'm focusing on structures of the African Bantu societies that have, I believe, or from my readings, have been there for a very long time, and I still think are shaping the community as it is changing today. So I'm focusing on those continuities, like maybe things like general beliefs when people are burying each other, and how the spirit of the day is connected to the ancestors. Things like Ubuntu, the everyday gestures that people do when they are greeting each other, and those little nuances.
Thank you very much, Lotti.
Yes, thanks, Jablan. My study on Zimbabwe-South Africa relations is a contribution that is significant in a sense that the subject has largely been considered in from a social science, in a way, political science perspective. If you talk about Zimbabwe-South Africa relations and you look at the works, they have not given the subject a historical feel, a long view of it. If you look at Zimbabwe from 1980 to 2000, let's say 2008, the works that we have are from the so-called dramatic periods. That is 1980 to 1987, where we have South African bombing or regional destabilization. Then we have a long gap in between. Then after 2000s, we have the issue of the Zimbabwean crisis, South Africa's quiet diplomacy, and also we have issues of how, for example, the crisis in Zimbabwe has provoked the mass movement of people from Zimbabwe to South Africa. So these issues, two issues, in a way, they are connected. They are also connected in the colonial era. There's a connection that you can find in the colonial era. So if you look at Zimbabwe's, the dynamics of Zimbabwe-South Africa relations in 1980 to 85, 87, they are connected a lot to the developments that were happening in the colonial era, UDI politics, the 1922 referendum, the federation politics, but the literature doesn't go back to make those connections. You look at the South Africa handling of the crisis in Zimbabwe, it has a lot to do with with Zimbabwe's contributions to the anti-apartheid struggle. So in a way, I'm trying to make connections of issues that political scientists have looked at or presented in isolation as disparate cases. So I'm trying to find a long connecting thread that links. Although I'm looking at the post-colonial period, I'm acknowledging that the relationship has, in a big way, been shaped by dynamics in the colonial period, Zimbabwe's colonial history. And I look at the fact that the 2000s form of relations that emerged are also shaped by dynamics that happened before 2000. So my study seeks to confirm what we as historians have always talked about, that events happening at any historical period, have been shaped by dynamics that have preceded or happened behind it. So before it. So there's a lot of interconnections when you are writing a history of the long view, that when you come from a certain disciplinary position, you may miss out on. So my study is largely an attempt to give political and diplomatic relations between South Africa and Zimbabwe a historical feel.
All right. Quite interesting, especially how you're mentioning the need for interconnectedness of these studies, and as well as the connections that are there. But I was more intrigued by your studies on the Zimbabwean side, when you are analyzing and looking at the role of chiefs in Zimbabwe, and perhaps this also goes to our two other discussants, maybe to say what are the challenges that you have faced in carrying out this kind of researches that you are currently undertaking? We'll start.
Yeah,
yes.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Lotti. It's okay.
Yeah, there are issues that I experienced doing both my MA and PhD researches and also postdoctoral researches about being a foreign student and a foreign research, practical issues, and a foreign researcher based in South Africa, but researching on Zimbabwe. So researching naturally is a challenging process, but at the same time, in equal measure, it's also rewarding and satisfying. So my experiences have been, when I go back home into the field, especially when I was doing my traditional leaders chiefs research, you tend to be seen as an outsider if you are coming from South Africa. Secondly, you can be viewed with suspicion. Are you not a journalist? Have you not been sent by CNN, BBC? You know, the political environment that we have in Zimbabwe. And also, it becomes expensive to do research in Zimbabwe when I was doing it. So you end up not going to other places where you think there is rich information because of funding issues. The idea being that when you are coming from a South African university, you are managed. So everything, you are paying for everything. You are paying to get information. You are paying to get this. The idea is that you are coming from South Africa. You must be managed. So everything is, you have to pay a lot of bribery, corruption, and to get information. So you are perceived as sort of an outsider, and you are looked at with suspicion. Sometimes you have to be conscious of your security when you are doing research in certain areas, especially areas that you are not used to. Then when I was doing my Zimbabwe-South Africa relations, the same things came up. You go to certain areas that have documents that you think are of interest to your research. You are also looked at with suspicion. Have you been cleared? Have you been vetted? And also, you know, I'm talking about the practical part of it, where you end up buying a ZANU-PF card to access a membership card to access certain areas of research, certain documents, or certain offices. So that's the practical side of it. But also, as an outsider doing research in South Africa, but researching on Zimbabwe, you realize that there are some advantages that come with it. You are in South Africa, so the pressure to perform is high. I think to a certain extent, if you compare when you are at home, so there's pressure to perform. So it's positive pressure. Then also you don't want to appear like a failure, especially when you are on a scholarship. You know that these people, they are paying for your PhD, so you have pressure to succeed, which I think sometimes raises anxieties, a lot of anxieties. Thanks, Jabulan.
Maybe on another day, I would be interested to understanding what you called the ZANU-PF card in terms of getting more information from the research institutions and places you would want to carry out research. I think maybe it's a pause for reflection in terms of the way we conduct research in Zimbabwe and the kind of things we need to have in terms of accessing these researches. I'll move on to Ruva and then lastly Jacky.
I would agree with a lot that Lotti has said already, and to that I would add that generally with the Zimbabwean climate right now, politically, economically, is really hard to do research, even when you're doing it as supposedly like institutions that cater for researchers, like the National Archives, for example. the issues of electricity. Sometimes there's no electricity, so you may travel all the way and then you find there's no electricity, you cannot access documents and you have to go back. And sometimes their scanner and their printer is not working. So even if you find the documents that you want, they will not let you take a picture, whereas maybe, or even use your own scanner. So it's those things that you have to negotiate with the staff and maybe find a way to have your information. Sometimes you end up having to pay for more for those documents when you could have just easily taken a photo or something like that. So that makes it very hard and more time consuming to do research for things that you would probably need less than an hour to accomplish. You might spend the whole week doing the same things, which really slows down a researcher. And we talk about the transport situation. It's very bad, especially if you're trying to commute or anything. It's I think as a researcher, you also have to join the struggle that everyday people are facing in their lives. And in a way, it's also good in that you get to experience what the people you are, especially me when I'm trying to write about the contemporary stuff about people in Masocha, experiencing that struggle, which the everyday person is also experiencing, kind of offers me a different perspective and brings me closer maybe to the experiences of the people that I'm trying to write about. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ruva. Jacky?
Oh, thank you very much. I wish we had time for everyone here to speak. I'm sure we would have a lot of challenges that we go through in doing the kind of research that we are doing. The other two panelists have spoken about some of the common challenges that we all go through. So perhaps I will resound some of those, but yes, I'll just mention a few. Maybe 3 or 4. And one of the challenges I have to grapple with, and I mentioned this earlier when I was introducing my research, is that I work with local oral sources of knowledge that are not widely available. And therefore, it's difficult in the sense that I have to go an extra mile to dig out these sources. Of course, the accompanying challenge is that oral sources of knowledge are almost always sidelined in academic discourse. And so that even puts me in a difficult situation when I have to find people to be in conversation with in my work. But of course, we have no shortage of theories, thankfully. Apart from that, and here when I talk about a great deal of African knowledge on Africa being preserved and transmitted orally, I'm referring to historical, cultural, literary, and so on. And because of this, we find that it's very demanding in terms of time and other resources, including, of course, money. And for example, if I was dealing with a written text, I would just have to walk into a bookstore, spend a few rands, and I have a book. But because I have to record this text, I have to spend sometimes even a month to record an equivalent of just 3 or 4 texts and spend way more money. So it's expensive in terms of time, in terms of other resources like money. And this, of course, calls into question the other challenge that I think all of us go through, the problem with funding, that African studies is underfunded, especially for us who are doing research here on the continent. And so we always have to look for external sources of funding, sometimes outside the continent, which the timelines don't always favor us, And so that's the challenge that I believe most of us are familiar with. And in relation to this challenge of African studies research being underfunded for African scholars on the African continent, we also now run into the conundrum that African studies knowledge. And here we're thinking about groundbreaking research and theories and so on emerge from outside the continent. So we're here trying to do research, but most of the new knowledge and information will always come from outside because of availability of funding and other resources that makes it possible for others to do that research that we could have done, but we are not able. Apart from that, one of the other challenges I have come across is that there's a very big disconnect in my research and in my area between archivists, orators, or the people I call indigenous knowledge experts, and researchers like myself. And that disconnection makes it difficult to do sustainable research that will build a visible and domineering archive. So that's one of the other challenges. And the last one I'll mention here is the question of language. When we're doing African studies research, especially for me, who does interviews from day to day, the question of language is one that cannot be avoided, because I will do my interviews in local languages and later find ways of, transcribing and translating my work to English, which is the language in which I write in. And language is very important because we are now faced with a situation in which we have to justify African languages as valid and able carriers of knowledge. Recently we had, this week and last week, we have vibrant discussions online on Twitter and on other platforms about the predicament of African studies as a discipline and as an ideology, but also African studies scholars as agents of, African studies knowledge. And on the question of language, I recently just read Nkomo, who said that it is such a pity that knowledge can be extracted from African cultures and languages, but only really count when it is stored in European languages. And so that's one of the things I grapple with on a daily basis, because I work with Kiswahili, but literature in Kiswahili, though available, does not occupy such an important and forceful position as literature in other languages would. Even the oral histories that I am recording in African languages are not widely known, perhaps because they were not recorded and preserved somewhere in a dominant language. And yeah, so those are some of the notable challenges that I go through, but which I believe are very relevant to most of us here. Thank you.
Yes.
I want to reiterate what Jacky just has been explaining, that language is indeed a challenge when you're dealing with interviews and oral histories and trying to translate, especially from a Shona language to English, because you run into a situation where some of the words or the meanings that you're trying to translate, they actually do not exist in the English language, and to try to bring that out in a manner that the person that you've been talking to or interviewing has been explaining it, it becomes a very difficult task for the researcher, that you just keep trying to get it as best as you can, but sometimes you are not able to really bring out what you're trying to explain in English.
Right. Thank you very much, Ruva. I see that in our chat box, there's a lot of feedback and comments. So I just want to read these in the chat box, and then open the floor for other people to just add in, their insights about African studies, or studying in Africa, the challenges that are there when we try to maybe decolonize knowledge, and like what Jacky was talking about, the disconnect between archivists and our researchers. But maybe in the interest of time, I would now open the floor. If we have anyone who has any highlights that they got, and any reflections that they make. And then after that, I'll just read on some of the comments that are in the chat box.
Yeah,
So
Jabulani, I just want to add one more thing before the flow comes.
Okay, Lord. Okay.
I'm looking at Zimbabwe-South Africa relations, and a substantial amount of the material that I'm using is written in Afrikaans. I think you would understand the apartheid system, the apartheid parliament, government. A substantial part of their correspondence, reports, memos is in Afrikaans. So I'm adding on to the complications that arise in terms of language.
Definitely, like you said, language is something that, challenges of transcribing and translating some of the data that we find. So now I am opening the floor. If we have anyone who wants to make a contribution before I then read the comments in the chat box. You can show by just raising your hand. Oh yes, James, please go ahead. And then after that, we have Kufa, Ushe. I think we cannot hear you, James. I think we cannot hear you. All right, maybe as you're fixing your audio connections, I would like to move on to Ushe, Simbai, and Tembani. So please, Ushe, go ahead. Simbai, can you, do you have a question? Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Jabu. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Thank you to the discussants. My question goes to Nkomo Lotti. I was happy to hear that the way that he was navigating and negotiating the spaces in terms of research. He then says sometimes you have to buy the ZANU-PF card in order to get to certain places and the like. My question is, if you use a ZANU-PF card to get to certain places, obviously maybe you are going to be given information on the basis that you are part or you are one of us. How does that then affect the way that you are going to present your information when you finally write your research paper? Number one. Number two, does it also not affect maybe the ethics of research? I'm coming from a point of view that you are painting a picture of something that you are not, assuming that you won't be a ZANU-PF member, but proceeding to get a ZANU-PF card. Thank you.
Can I respond?
You can respond, Lodge, maybe in 2 to 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, by ZANU-PF card, I was giving it as an example, but it's the most common one because they dominate the spaces where most of the information that we want to get. Even if you are researching on a subject that would require you to access MDC archives or opposition political party archives, you may want to show that you are one of them, to allay their fears that you are a sellout, you are an agent, you are. That's the practical part of doing research in some instances. Then on the issue of ethics, issues of ethics arise. Obviously, they arise, but the first part is, will it influence the way I will then write my story? I think it shouldn't, but it may influence. It depends with individuals and how you interpret it. It may, but it shouldn't. They give you information. Now it's now up to you to write your own story. Then third, the issue of, back to the issue of ethics. Yeah, ethics involves a lot of things, involves a lot of, in some instances, it can be a criminal act, but the practicalities of doing research all over the world, we have seen stings on BBC, on CNN, there are things that, if there are stories that may not be told if we don't take certain approaches that you may deem as unethical. So it depends on how you interpret it, how you take it. But I can defend it in the way that it's a practical approach to getting information in a very inaccessible and research unfriendly environment. I think some people have been at the National Archives, they have seen the dynamics that exist there. You may have to buy lunch for someone, you may have to give a lift to someone to get certain kind of information. And it's a practical way. I would say it's a practical way of doing research, and it's part of our reality.
Thank you, Lotti, for bringing that aspect out. But I think it would just even lead to more, interesting questions. So I think we might need to even set aside a seminar series on, the practicalities and the ethical issues surrounding challenges on research. But I think we still have one more hand. Chambani Dube, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks Jabu, and thanks for organizing this, to the organizers, and also to the presenters. This was really insightful and interesting in so many ways, and I really share with a lot of issues and the challenges surrounding research, which I've experienced in my own during my own research. I would like really to go into the issue of African languages, and to Jacky, especially, who touched on that issue of using African languages and the challenges. For me, maybe drawing from my own research experiences, I would really say that for me, using the Ndebele language and the times Kalanga language in the communities where I do my research has been quite empowering and enriching, in the sense that some of the oral histories that I found there, it's not like a historical narrative that you find there. You can find it in existing in the forms of say poems, in the forms of songs. And so this really has enriched my research experience, instead of, kind of disempowering and having a lot of challenges. So maybe my question to you, Jacky, and maybe others, can share their insight, is that how can we really use these African languages in our research in such a way that it empowers and also broadens and also enriches our research? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chambani, for that question. I think to our panelists, is anyone willing, can anyone maybe just provide insights on the questions that just were asked now? Yes, Jacky.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much for your question about how we can use African languages to empower and not disempower. And I'm sorry if it wasn't, from my perspective, it was a challenge in how I conduct the research and present the findings, but I take so much joy and pride in researching in African languages. And I do appreciate that it even allows the communities among which I research to feel important and to feel acknowledged when we ask them to narrate their experiences, their histories, their literatures in their own languages, in our African languages. And so the best thing we can do is to continue focusing on African language research and research into knowledge that is carried in African languages, I think that should be enough. It's a challenge in the sense that it's not dominant, it's not the norm, but it's empowering in the sense that we can engage in that knowledge production in appreciation of the people that we work with, and an appreciation of their culture, which language is a part. We cannot research their culture and divorce their languages from them, because then what will we be doing? So I do agree with you that doing this kind of research is empowering. It's not a disempowering tool. Thank you.
I think this might be our last round of questions. So we want to take all those who have questions. Then we present the questions to our panelists. So if anyone who has questions, please raise your hand, and then we give time for our panelists to answer the questions once. So I will start with Brian Kauma and then James.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists for their insights. Just a quick one. So can they perhaps share about the challenge that they faced coming from studying what is perceived as a global South versus the already existing literature that perhaps was constructed by foreign scholars, which is wide and out there? And have they experienced the idea where they come and say, this is what my respondents or my interviews are saying, which is perhaps different from what would be existing in the literature, and so they then encounter different pushbacks from perhaps senior scholars or senior existing literature? Has that ever come about within their studies and their research?
Please go ahead with your question. We cannot hear you, James. Maybe you can type the question in the chat box, then the panelists can attend to them. I think I would just need to read a few more questions that are coming out in our chat box before our panelists answer. So there's a question from Marwa who says, a wonderful discussion. The issue of an outsider. Do we have researchers who are considered insiders? Isn't it a norm that the moment you try to research on something, you become the other, and those around you would want to understand why you are interested in what you want to know? And then the other question is coming from Sibongile Mawuya, who says, thank you, Tim. Are they gender dynamic in doing research in Africa? Yes, I think those were two main questions. The others were more of commentary and reflection. So over to you, our panelists, before we close the session.
Can I try to respond to Evans tomorrow?
Yes, Lotti.
Yes, the issue of insiders and outsiders when doing research, it's a permanent feature. I agree, it's a permanent feature as long as you come back to a community as a researcher. But I think there are levels of insiderhood or outsiderhood. So, for example, in an area that I researched for my MA, I was a total outsider at many levels. In Rusape, it was my first time to be in that part of the world. But in another research that I did 2 months back on a different subject, I am an outsider. The people that I am an insider. The people that I was interviewing, it's an artisanal gold mining issue. So these people are my friends, colleagues, relatives that I was interviewing. So I agree. The moment I start interviewing them, I become an outsider. They now look at me differently. So I think there are levels on how much you can become an outsider and how much you can become an insider. So on certain levels, you are an outsider. On certain levels, you are just an outsider. So the intensity depends on the subject that is being researched and where you are standing between the interviewee, the interviewer, or the researcher and the research area.
For our panelists, Ruva and Jacky, do you have any insights or reflections about these questions?
Oh, okay, thank you. Perhaps on the question of gender, because Lotti has addressed the insider, outsider, researcher, researched, and interviewee power dynamics in research. I mean, this broadly calls our attention to the question of positionality. And yes, it is a valid concern in research that gender matters. For example, I am a young woman doing research in which I'm forced, or not forced like I'm forced, but I find myself interviewing older men in a society that is culturally different from mine, different religion, in a different language sometimes. So yes, questions of gender, even age, language, differences in religion, they do matter in research, and they sometimes determine how much you can get or cannot get. You will find that sometimes there is knowledge that is a preserve of men in a certain culture, and therefore as a woman, you would not easily penetrate. Or conversely, knowledge that is known amongst women that as a young man or a man doing research, you would not get access to that information. And so there are many filters in, yeah, these are concerns that, of course, the researcher will then have to prepare themselves by understanding the culture in which they're going into and assessing their positionality and therefore how possible it is that they will conduct research successfully. And yes, thank you.
And one more last hand. Ushe, is your hand still up? Maybe you have a reflection that you want to share with the audience.
No, not quite. My internet was going up and down until I had sort of given up. But now that you've mentioned me, I might exploit the opportunity. And one of the things that I had in mind linked to an idea I made reference to around decolonization or decolonizing knowledge is related to the contribution by Lotti, where I'm saying, look, from the West, there are set methods, research methods, ethical, research boundaries, but I have a sense that they're not quite as universal, and that each context has allows for flexibility. I mean, doing things that may not quite be considered ethical. I mean, honestly, in a context like Zimbabwe, you may need to go an extra mile to get your papers running. I mean, simple papers like if you're an outsider and you want to get a research clearance, you might need to soften certain, to grease certain hands for that to happen. And otherwise, you are not likely to do research in Zimbabwe at all, But those are realities, and like Lotti said, it doesn't quite affect the data that you're going to get at the end of the day, because this is getting you a permission to do research. So I think there's room to actually say more around these things, and actually, Kauma, our next discussion could be around research ethics, decolonizing research ethics. It'd be very interesting, because some of us, the way we've gotten information. I remember trying to be very honest and say I've left University of Zimbabwe and so forth to an informant, but that informant, when they were introducing me, they felt my link to use it is the gate pass to actually get information. And my link was introducing me as a staff member from the University of Zimbabwe, working from the Department of Health, because apparently my research was around drugs. I've never been anywhere near the health department at UZ, even when I was there. What was I supposed to do? Rush and say, look, you're lying. You're killing my research. You're disturbing my research ethics, and so forth. So it's a sticky wicket. I mean, that's all I can say.
Thank you very much, Ushe, for that observation. Researchers in Zimbabwe, especially, or maybe doing research in Zimbabwe, we might want to soften or breeze certain hands to get the kind of information that would allow us to continue with our research. And perhaps maybe one of the next sessions, like you said, Ushe, can be on decolonizing research ethics. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this robust discussion. Thank you very much for all your contributions and reflections. Thank you very much for attending. Have yourselves a pleasant afternoon.
Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you.